when you were with the Bureau and you were going into a situation, was there any kind of like pre-performance routine or anything? Like, so let's say you have an emergency, you have a crisis you have to deal with. Maybe, I don't know what it would typically look like. Maybe it's a couple hours, maybe it's 5 hours before you get there, whatever. What would you do to get your head on straight? Were there any nutritional tactics you would use? Anything? Like, what was your pregame? Now, I'm pretty stoked to announce too that for the last couple of years, I have been working with Thrive Market on creating my own product with them. And we decided a couple years back that a good nut butter would be the perfect product to team up on. So my nut butter has officially launched. So there's a couple of different ones. There's a macadamia nut, there's a cinnamon Brazil nut, which is sweet and tastes amazing, that's sweetened with allulose. And there's a chocolate hazelnut flavor, which is amazing. And they're going to abide by my rules too. There's a few different nuts in them, and then there's some allulose, and there's some salt. There's no fillers, there's no weird stuff. And the cool thing is, if you get them through Thrive Market using that link down below, you'll save 30% off your entire grocery order, which also includes my nut butters. Plus you get a $60 free gift when you use that link. So you use that link down below, and then you can find the nut butters there on the website, and you can try whatever different flavor you want. I highly recommend you check them out. I created them in tandem with Thrive Market, so what you're getting is literally what I formulated and what I made. So definitely check them out. And if you're already a Thrive Market member, I'll put a link down below in the description that's specifically for a Thrive Market member that goes directly to that page as well.
I'm old enough that we didn't have a lot of great nutritional mechanisms that we were aware of when I was a hostage negotiator, but the pregame really was, we start collaborating as a team. Like, you want to go fast, go alone, you want to go far, go as a team.
Yeah. And
how much could we prep for the predictable aspects of the conversation as a team in advance?
Yeah.
Now, there was one of the guys that I worked with that I really learned from, a guy named Byron Sage. And Byron was actually the voice that spoke to the people at Waco.
Okay.
Now, there were a lot of people involved at Waco. My former boss, Gary Nessner, ran the overall negotiation operation. Byron happened to be assigned to Texas out of the Austin RA, and he was the guy that he spoke directly to either Koresh or Koresh's number two.
Okay.
And he was so effective. Byron actually had a face-to-face with Koresh's number two. He had such an impact on the guy. The guy goes walking back into the compound, and Koresh sees that his number two guy has been strongly influenced by Byron. And Koresh never let that guy talk to Byron ever again. That's how good Byron was.
Okay.
So then I started working more directly with him, and he started talking about sieges when they were on a hunt for a bad guy, and they were preparing for it to turn into a siege. And Byron stands up the negotiation operations cell, and then they start talking about all the predictable dialogue and what they're going to say in advance. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, like, that's brilliant. The team is getting ready in advance to basically mentally rehearse for what some of the challenges would be. Get their repetitions in. My son now, Brandon, likes to say, get your preps and reps in. Do your preparation, get your mental repetitions in advance.
Yeah.
And I was really inspired by that. So any time that we were getting ready to deploy into anything, I started bouncing ideas off the team that's working with me, whether it's just one other person or whether we got a whole group of guys. And we start kicking the ideas around, we kind of get into sync, and then the brain gets into gear and we become creative with each other.
Interesting. Yeah, so that's, really being able to, getting the bugs out of your mouth too, so to speak. Really just getting everything flowing. Because I would imagine there's probably never really a situation where you're just going to be cold dropped into a situation with zero time to think about it. Maybe in other aspects of the Bureau, but as far as your role was concerned, did you almost always have a little bit of prep, maybe even ranging from 30 minutes to if you had to go overseas or anything like that?
There would always be enough time to start getting your head around it. And once you've done it a few times, of course, you're going to get your head around it faster because then there are predictable patterns. Like one of the reasons why we really came out of hostage negotiation and business negotiation was, we were taught the other side's going to be driven by loss.
Yeah.
Like no matter what kind of siege it is, whether it's a spontaneous, there's basically three kinds of sieges: spontaneous, planned for, and prepared for.
Okay.
And they run very specific lengths of time. I can't remember. There was a siege that was on TV recently. CNN reached out to me, and they said, look, we'd like to schedule it for Monday night. And this is like 48 hours away. And I go, well, you could schedule me for Monday night, but this thing's going down in 12 hours. Yeah. And it's going to be over. And they were like, yeah, sure it is. And it was done 12 hours later because I knew the profile of the siege.
Yeah.
And they emailed me back and they were like, wow, how'd you know? And I know the earmarks of the siege.
Yeah.
So you go through the dynamics enough times, you begin to see what the profile, what the time frame is going to be. And then what's going to drive the people inside. It's always going to be a sense of loss.
Yeah.
Some sense of loss is always going to be driving a behavior. So then, just before I get out, 2002, Danny Kahneman wins the Nobel Prize for prospect theory, behavioral economics, Nobel Prize, that loss thinks twice as much as an equivalent gain for all human nature.
Yep.
All A-L-L.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you eat, doesn't matter what your religion is. You know, one of the things I like to joke about, you know, tactical empathy is so effective it even works on vegans. That's effective.
That's perfect.
So, but we understood the triggers in hostage negotiation, crisis negotiation, and we thought it was just hostage negotiation.
Yeah.
And then as the more and more information gets shared through the early 2000s up to today, everybody's saying, no, this is human nature. This is human behavior, period. And then now, as the neuroscience performance that you're talking about, we got neuroscience that we didn't have 10 years ago.
Yep.
And we find that, again, this affects human beings, period, regardless of gender, ethnicity, geographical upbringing, anything else. It's how people are wired.
So you think that fear of loss really drives, I mean, not just, can it drive our traits too? I mean, because in a way, traits are sort of just, almost just fabricated forms of our behaviors, right? I mean, like we develop traits.
Right.
What is a trait, right? Is a trait just something that you've kind of, I envision a trait as this rut that I've dug in clay in a canyon from my habits, right?
Right.
Like, is a trait something you're born with? I don't know. That's a kind of a random question, but that fear of loss, I've recognized that, I mean, a lot of my motivations come from a fear of loss. They really do. I mean, I think, and it's really what drives me, and I think coming to terms with that can actually be a very beneficial thing, you know? Like, why do I strive to look a certain way? Why do I strive to maintain a certain level of health, physique? Is it the fear of loss of losing something else? Or so it's pretty interesting. You find that almost all fundamental behavior is rooted back in that?
Yeah. Short answer is yes. You know, there's a fair amount of debate over sort of degrees of impact. So, what we'll say is it's the single biggest driver. It doesn't mean it's the only driver.
Yeah.
And, before I started hearing about neuroscience, we'd hear from different psychologists. Somebody would contend that all behavior is driven by fear.
Yeah.
And other psychologists would contend all behavior is driven by either fear or love. Fear is still a big one. And fear of what? Fear of loss.
Yep.
And Kahneman and Tversky came up with the theory, which a lot of other psychologists supported. They were a couple of interesting cats, and just from what I've read about them, Tversky, his partner, would have won the Nobel Prize as well, but he was deceased by the time it was delivered. Danny Kahneman makes no bones about the fact that that's the only reason that Amos Tversky didn't get it also. But these were a couple of interesting cats. And there's you can read a really hard, his book, Danny Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Okay.
Is a heavy read. Yeah. Danny Kahneman is an in-depth, complicated thinker. And maybe for me, in-depth, complicated reads are a lot because when I read, my lips get tired, so I can't read really big, long books. Boom, boom, a lot of comedy here.
Yeah.
But they're worth learning about, and these were two disruptive guys too. Like they were only interested in what worked, and so for the longest time they were heretics, and which they loved.
Yeah.
And then when suddenly they went from being heretics to being the status quo that everybody wanted to argue with, that kind of caught them off guard too.
Yeah, true.
So, but again, the original question was fear of loss.
Yeah.
So it's the biggest driver. It's not the only driver. It's where you start with, though, if you want to influence behavior.
Yeah.
Let's start with what matters most.